Now, let's go through these 10 statements. Most of them you should be very familiar with, so I won't go to every passage. But those of us who rightly divide the word of truth understand we live in something called the dispensation of grace. The administration of grace, the stewardship of grace. It is a set of rules that God's established for us to live today. That's why Paul uses that word dispensation, so that we realize this is the instructions for us today. And he calls those instructions grace. Paul says in Acts 20 to the Ephesian elders, he's to testify the gospel of the grace of God. If you use a concordance and look up the word grace, Paul uses that word more than anybody. Nobody comes close. Grace so permeates this dispensation, this time of how God's dealing with us, that it is indeed the characteristic of how God deals with us. Number 2, every aspect of God's dealing with us is on the basis of grace. Never does he go back to the law in how he deals with us. Never. We're not under law, but under grace. Never forget that. He writes to the Galatians to chide them for going back under the law. Who hath bewitched you, he says. So we're not to go back under the law to please God. We need the full knowledge to please God. That's the mystery. Or to live holy lives. Number 3, the definition of grace in its simplest form is unconditional love and acceptance. That is a very special word, and it's very important to understand that word unconditional. There's no conditions. Now remember, under the law, at Mount Sinai, when Moses came down, he says, if you'll do this, then I'll bless you. That's an example of a conditional blessing. There was also conditional cursings. If you don't do this, I'll curse you. That's conditional. The law is based on conditional acceptance or conditional punishment. Under grace, there's no conditions. Absolutely none. Number 4, we just mentioned, conditional blessings and cursings is the definition of the law. Believers are not under law, but under grace. We already said that, number 5, and we understand that. Number 6, we are saved by grace. Not only are we saved by grace, we're to live by grace. God doesn't save us by grace and then put us under the law for holy living. That's what Paul wrote Galatians for. Chapter 3, who hath bewitched you that you should go back? Having begun in faith, are we made perfect in the flesh? It says in Galatians 3. Absolutely not. Pardon me. So, grace is how we should live today. Number 7, the believer is never under condemnation. And I do want to look at a couple verses here. Let's go to Romans chapter 8 and verse 1. If there's a verse to memorize and to hold dear to your heart, regardless of your circumstances, it would be this. Romans chapter 8. Says this, verse 1. There is therefore now no condemnation to them which are in Christ Jesus, who walk not after the flesh but after the Spirit. For the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus hath made me free from the law of sin and death. We're free from the law that curses us. You know that word epinosis? Paul uses that in Romans 3:19, where he says the law is the full knowledge of sin. How does it make us holy? It's the full knowledge of sin. But there's no condemnation to those that are in Christ Jesus. Who are those that are in Christ Jesus? That's a phrase to go look up. In Christ Jesus. Paul's the only guy who uses that phrase. And what does it mean? It means the moment we're saved, we're placed in Christ Jesus. 2 Corinthians 2:5-21 says, He hath made him to be sin for us who knew no sin, that we might be the righteousness of Christ in him. We're in him. And that's how God sees us. In Christ. One more passage in Romans chapter 8 is towards the end of the chapter. Verse 33 we'll start with. Who shall lay anything to the charge of God's elect? In other words, who can condemn us? Who can point the finger at us? Who can have a charge against us? It's God that justifies us, so it's not God. Who is he that condemns us? It's Christ that died, yea, rather, that has risen again, who is even at the right hand of the Father, who makes intercession for us. So Christ doesn't condemn us. Verse 35, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? And the answer is nothing. We are in Christ. Nobody can lay a charge to us. There's no condemnation, no charge against us, because we're in Christ Jesus always. Number 8, God is not imputing our trespasses against us. And here we have to go to 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 19. This is another important verse to remember, and it's part of the dispensational change that has occurred. It's part of the dispensation of grace. This was not true under the law. Under the law, God was imputing the trespasses against them. So much so that he brought in Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon to conquer the Jews, because the Lord was long-suffering, but he finally had enough. And they were carried away captive. And while the Jews lived in captivity, they moaned and groaned about, why, God, why have you done this? When are you going to come back to us? And then there was the prophets who gave them hope, saying, he will return. But God indeed punished them under the law. He was imputing their trespasses. But now, he's not. Paul says, and I'll start in verse 17. Therefore, if any man be in Christ, there's that phrase, in Christ. Who's in Christ? The saved. He's a new creation, a new creature. Old things are passed away. Our old man is passed away. We now have a new man. That new man is renewed in epinosis. See that? The new man that we have now that we're saved is renewed in the mystery. Nice to know the Gospels. Nice to know the Old Testament. But Paul's epistles are what renews us, encourages us, blesses us, and gives us the motivation to live godly lives. All things are become new. New because they've just been revealed to Paul. And all things are of God, who hath reconciled us to himself by Jesus Christ, and hath given to us the ministry of reconciliation. What is this ministry of reconciliation? Here it is. To wit, or to know, that God was in Christ reconciling the world unto himself, not imputing their trespasses unto them, and hath committed to who? Us! The word of reconciliation. So God is not imputing our trespasses against us. He doesn't see them. He doesn't see them. I'll say that again a different way in a minute. Now, when was God in Christ reconciling the world unto himself? You say, well, that's at the cross, right? Well, that's the means by which he accomplished what he was able to do. But when was God reconciling the world? The world means the Gentiles. Was God reconciling Gentiles at Pentecost? No. As a matter of fact, when Peter went to that Gentile Cornelius, the other 11 guys chided him for it. What'd you go to them for? We're not supposed to go to the Gentiles. Gentiles aren't reconciled yet. As a matter of fact, this ministry about God reconciling the world, Paul says, was given to us. This is Paul's message. Paul's message is the ministry of reconciliation. It's the message how that now God is bringing the Gentiles back into a potential relationship with them if they get saved. Whereas before that time, they were cast off. They were cast aside. Israel was the head, not the tail. The Gentiles had no access to God except to become a proselyte, a Jew by religion. So this ministry is new. It's what Paul says in Romans 11, how that God has made, essentially has concluded all in unbelief that he might have mercy upon all. That's Paul's message. You won't find that in the Gospels. You won't find that in Acts chapter 2. You only find it in Paul's message. Number 9. God's attitude towards sin hasn't changed. We live in the dispensation of grace, so you think, oh, God's lax about sin. Yeah, go ahead and sin. He doesn't care. No, God's attitude towards sin has not changed. Just his motivation has. His means of dealing with us who sin has changed. That's what's different under Paul's message. And we're going to get to that in that second handout I gave you. Does God discipline the believer in the dispensation of grace? Yes, he does. Does he discipline the believer like he did under the law? Absolutely not. Lastly, verse 10. This is something I had a discussion with a grace preacher, a very well-known grace preacher. God's program of grace, whether we think it works or not, is his program of grace for today. You may not see the results you'd like. I'd love to see this church full to capacity, overflowing. We don't see the results. I'd love to see those I love so much be living for the Lord, knowing the mystery, but that's not always the case. But it's still the truth for today. It's still the dispensation we live under today, whether we see the results we think we should see or not, or that we want to see. So, those 10 facts are things to hang your hat on and to hold on at all costs. Never lose sight of them.